Well, good morning, everybody. This is Ben Thorpe with Farm Equipment Magazine. Welcome to our latest webinar in conjunction with the Western Equipment Dealers Association. Now, today's presenter is Wayne Brozek. He's an instructor with the Dealer Institute. Wayne has trained dealers all over the globe on ways to improve both their parts and service operations, and that was prior to starting his own consulting business. And he works to improve customers' financial health and make their employees more productive and engaged. Now, before we start his presentation, there's two quick things we need to go over. So if you look on your screen, you'll see on the control panel at the bottom, there's a small Q&A icon. You can go there to submit questions at any time during the presentation. And then at the end, with our allotted time, we'll go through as many as we can before we wrap up for the day. And then this webinar is also being recorded, and a recording of it will be available later today on farmequipment.com. So that's all our housekeeping items. And I do want to emphasize you can ask questions at any point during the presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Wayne.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate that. Well, welcome, everybody. As Ben said, this is our Parts, Processes, and Profit webinar. We have approximately 45 minutes together with a little time at the end for Q&A. So today's class is going to progress pretty quickly. So if you would grab a pen and paper and just make sure if you want to jot some notes down, that'd be great. But let me give you just a quick background about myself. I started about 30 years ago, and that's why I'm almost bald and completely gray, but have experience in the auto and the ag industries. I started in the back parts counter for a local Ford dealership. And when I left to go to school, I went to a local Ford dealership and asked if they needed some help, and they said, sure. And I started working there as a back counterparts person as well, taking care of, at the time, I think we had around 18 or 20 some techs and about 4 or 5 individuals in our lube center. So worked the back parts counter, taking care of the technicians back there, became an assistant parts manager. And at that time, I'd really gotten involved in parts inventory management. I was worried about fill rate and off the shelf fill rate and turns and things like that, because a lot of my friends were technicians and trying to satisfy their needs and fulfill their parts demands. Sometimes we could do it and sometimes we couldn't. And a lot of times we'd show a part and didn't have it on the shelf, and that would make them very upset and make myself upset. So I became really passionate about parts inventory management and the science behind that. So when my parts manager retired, I became the parts manager and done that for several years. Then the service manager had left our dealership, and the owner asked me if I'd like to go into service. And I said, you better believe it. Service is always chewing the parts department out. So yeah, I want to get out of there and I want to get on the other side. So left the frying pan and jumped right into the fire, and done that for several years. And Ford came to us and said, look, we're switching our models up. We really don't like a parts manager, service manager structure. We'd rather have a fixed operations director that takes care of both. So that became my new role, and done that for several years, and always seen on the sales side, those guys were getting cookies and cakes and donuts and stuff brought in, and people are joking and laughing down there and having a lot of fun. So I decided I'd really like to get into sales and get out of the parts and service department where we're always getting chewed out. So went into sales, done used car sales, new car sales, became a general manager, and then had the opportunity to buy the local store that I started my career in, and became a partner down in that location. That, I tell people all the time, partnerships are a lot like marriages. Some are great, some aren't so great. Mine wasn't so great and ended up in a divorce. So got out of that business, and the neighbor across the street from where I lived had some John Deere stores at the time and asked me if I'd like to come to work for him. Told him I really didn't have any ag experience, but what I did know is parts and service. So I joined their group and worked for him for almost 16 years and went from 4 or 5 locations up to 16 locations in 3 states, and represented large and small ag, power sports as well. During that time, I was asked if I'd be interested in joining a performance group, and really enjoyed that, and became a consultant with this group and traveled throughout North America, South America, and taught parts and service managers, primarily service managers at the time, how to improve their service operations. In 2017, I started WB Global Services, which is a dealership parts and service consulting, and started with a 20 group model, and we've grown that. And in 2021, WIDA asked if I would join their organization, and I did. And so I'm out of the retail environment and now just strictly doing training for dealerships and consulting work. So that's a little bit about me. And I tell you, I've had a chance to look through some of the roster, and we have several hundred people in attendance to this afternoon. So thank you very much for that. And there's a ton of experience in that. Some of the names I've recognized, and there's a ton of experience in the audience today. So we'll have knowledge base from just getting into this business and some senior veterans as well. And like Ben said, at the very end, we'll have a Q&A session. You can always type your question in the chat button. And at the very end of today's webinar, I'll put up my email address and our website, and you can visit that. Drop me any kind of note or comments that you'd like. Okay. So today, like I said, we've got approximately 40 minutes together, and it's going to go by really quick. What I'd ask is that you just get a pen and a paper, and if you hear an idea or a thought or something that makes you think, wow, I might want to look at that, jot it down. Because I've been to a lot of classes myself. I've attended a lot of webinars just like this, and I'll hear something that I think, wow, that makes good sense. I should try to implement that. And I'd make some notes, and that's all fine and good. But the real problem was, just like this little thing down here, the idea, plan, and action. The problem was I never made a good enough plan, and I didn't share that plan with anybody to help hold me accountable. So I'd hear a really good idea, and then I'd get off the webinar, and all of a sudden I'm back in the daily fires and the grind and phone calls. And next thing you know, that piece of paper is getting shuffled around on my desk, and I look at it, and I may even file it, put it on my bookcase and say, I'm going to get to that someday. But someday never came. So don't do as I did. Please do something better. Write a note, share it with a coworker, and make a plan and take action. And if you do, 4, 5, 6 months, a year from now, if something you heard today made sense and made a change in your operations and you enjoyed it, share your note. I'd love to hear some of your success stories. Okay. So like Ben said, you can ask questions. You can do it in the chat. You can just type it in, and Ben will share it with us or share it with myself, and we'll get to make sure we get an answer for you. But since we have less than 40 minutes now, let's get right after. Okay. So today, for the short time, we're going to real briefly talk about processes and profit. Now, I must say that the Dealer Institute, who I work for as well, can provide this training one-on-one for your dealership group a whole lot better. Today is just going to be a really quick down and dirty. But if you think, wow, I've heard some good things, I think I'd like to know more, you can always reach out to us, and we would sure help you. So today, what we're going to go through, we're going to talk about revenue and budgets. We're going to talk about revenue by categories. We're going to discuss gross margin and some things that we can do to impact our gross margin or improve it. We're going to talk about a pricing matrix. Do you have one? Do you utilize a pricing matrix for your parts? We're going to talk a little bit about net income and how we control some expenses. Then we're going to put some KPIs together. I've put together a short list of some KPIs and some averages for large and small ag, blended them together, just kind of give you a basic benchmark. Some of them you may be exceeding, and some you may be falling short. These are by no means saying, hey, this is where I have to be. Wayne said I need to be here. No, these are just guides, okay? And then we're going to talk through some task lists that I found useful when I was a parts manager, things that I did daily, weekly, and monthly, okay? So let's talk about revenues and budgets. Do you have a budget? Do you even set a budget? I've trained several dealerships, and it runs the gamut. Some dealerships have a really good, robust budget and forecasting model. Other dealerships don't really have anything. Some dealers don't even share their financials except for maybe once a quarter or twice a year. So if you're looking at setting a forecast, what I would recommend is let's look back and grab 3 to 5 years of financial data so we can look at it and say, here's where we were, here's where we want to go. And you've got a good set of financial data to support your decision. Now, some people, and I don't have no problem with this, they say, hey, look, I want to grow my parts sales 10, 15, 20, 25%, depending on what's going on in their market area. Some people just do a basic 10%. Well, that's a real easy way to do it, I would think, just shooting from the hip, saying, let's just grow our revenue 10%. But is that realistic? And again, we need to measure not only the revenue, but we need to measure and control the expenses as well. So is that budget reviewed every quarter and revised? Some of the best practices I've seen is every 90 days, you're sitting down and you're reviewing your budget. You're talking about your budget. You're talking about your revenue goals. You're sharing, did anything change? And I put some bullet points in here. You know, market conditions change. There's a lot of change and a lot of flux in our current market, and has been in here for about 18 to 24 months. The past 24 months have been really crazy. There's also weather condition changes in certain geographical areas. You could have a drought, you could have a flood. So you may need to revise or improvise and change up your quarterly budget. And then, does the budget stay the same? Some people just post it and say, yes, this is our expense line, this is our revenue line, we're not going to adjust it. But I really think the best practice is about every 90 days to look at it, revise it, and change it up. Okay. And then how and what do you ensure the success of that budget, right? Did we tie it to any incentive plans? There's short-term incentive plans, long-term incentive plans. But once you have a forecast and a budget set up, then you can actually put some financial rewards to it. Okay. Now, if we're going to build our revenues in our parts department, we basically have two that we're going to talk about today: over the counter and through the shop. So if we're going to grow our revenues by that example of 10%, or could be 8%, whatever, how do we increase our revenue? You know, here's a couple bullet points I threw down here for you to get some ideas. Do you utilize an outside salesperson? Now, I've heard and seen and experienced it myself. The outside salesperson, that's kind of like a unicorn. They're kind of hard to find the right individual. But once you find that right individual, they are worth their weight in gold, right? I mean, these people are going out and delivering parts and helping promote part specials and really growing our market area. So if you find the right individual, or you have the right individual, let's utilize them to ensure our growth. Do we proactively market to our customers? Sometimes we just rely on, if we're a corporate group, or we just rely on a few ads that are up on our website, but we don't really go out and proactively market to our customers. You don't have to have an outside salesperson to do this for you, right? As a parts manager, you could schedule 2 or 3 days a month, maybe get in a truck with a service manager, go out and visit our customers and market to them. Okay. Another thing that's been a really good tool that I've used in the past as well is a CRM tool to rake our customers by department, right? And what we're looking for is we want to compare year over year data. So we made an example, pull a report that says, give me the top customers, parts customers by sales volume. Okay. And your CRM tool will list them all out there. And you look at that, and you also put side by side. Now I know what my top parts customer is. How did that same customer compare in our service department? What's their revenue in service and in whole goods or new complete goods sales? Okay. And once we have that, then what I'd really like to see is take the top 25 or 30 customers on that list and put a target to them. Say, look, I'd like to increase them by 5 or 10 or 8%. Maybe then go to the even bottom of the lower customers and say, look, there's a lot of room for growth here. There's a ton of potential here. Some of our top producers, you might gain 3 to 5%, maybe 8 to 10. The bottom group, if they've been customers in the past, and then all of a sudden you look at their year over year or the last 3 years, according to your CRM tool, and you see the sales have declined, it might be a good idea to go visit with those customers, because there could be something that's really irritating them, something we've done in the past that we're not even aware of any longer. And we just need to visit with them, but we haven't shadowed their farm doors for a while. And so that CRM report is really good at helping us do that. Okay. Another thing that's really helped grow some over the counter sales is doing a telephone blitz. And again, like I said, we have a short amount of time today, but in our Dealer Institute class, we talk about how do you build a good telephone or a marketing campaign. And there's 4 steps to every marketing campaign that we want to make sure we hit. This one I'm just going to tell you about is doing a targeted telephone blitz. That has produced some really good results in the past. I've seen some really good success with that, but I've also seen it fail because we don't plan for it. We don't train our people. We don't know how to train our people to make a really good telephone solicitation call. So we can do preseason, postseason. We can do it by machine or category, seeding, harvesting, whatever. But we need to get on the phone and start calling these customers and find a way to get them to come in and buy some more parts from us. And the other thing is we need to become more of a solutions provider versus an order taker. And I know that we hear that a lot, right? Especially on the parts side. We really want our people to become better at sales. We want them to become better salespeople. Well, we need to provide sales training to them, number one, and we can do that. We can offer that. But number two is I really think we need to have them work through our shop, work on the back counter, get experience with our technicians, our professional technicians that understand how repairs go. Because we have the same problem in service, and I teach this in our service class as well. But say, for example, what I'm talking about by a solution provider versus an order taker is somebody comes up to your counter and needs a water pump. We look it up. We typically look up an OEM part. If we have it, we tell them, yes, I've got it. Here's the price. Would you like me to get it? And the customer says yes or no. If they say yes, typically what we see is our parts counter people will go grab the part, bring it to them, type up the ticket, and say, thank you very much. Well, that's fine, but that's not great. And it's not really that good, but it's fine. What we'd really like to see is those same people be trained and coached enough to understand that, hey, look, this job requires antifreeze, requires a gasket. Maybe the gasket comes with it, maybe it didn't, some silicone or sealant. And maybe, you know what, you've already taken the belt off. What about replacing the belt? How about an idler? Does it have an idler on that system? All those kinds of things, because I've seen it time and time again, and I hear the horror stories. Customer comes in, buys that water pump. 3 hours later, they're back in the store saying, and they say to us, oh, you know what? I should have probably grabbed a belt for that thing when I was in here earlier. Do you happen to have that belt? Well, that's really shame on us, not so much shame on the customer, but shame on us because we should have been more of a solutions provider and offered that up front. And like I said, we do the same thing in service, right? And we train, and I train against this for our service departments as well. Somebody comes in, needs that water pump, for example, replaced. We replace the water pump, but when we were pulling it in, we hear a clunking noise up front. We see the SCV valves are leaking. And sometimes our people get this wrong impression or wrong thought that management wants us to do these little inspections just so we can find additional items to sell, right? Like it's almost like a negative, like we're looking for things to sell. Well, yes and no. What we're really looking for is trying to take care of our customer, right? They just had it in for a water pump. They leave, they take it, they start working that piece of equipment. And what happens? That clunk noise up front turns out to be a bearing that's seized or is wearing out. Now they call back in. And what's the first thing they say to us as a service manager? I just had my piece of equipment in your shop, right? And that's a negative, no different than on our parts counter. So we really need to coach and train our people, parts managers, on how to ask for additional items, okay? And another thing that I teach in our parts class is, what about, do we train our parts counter people to say, hey, yes, I do have the water pump. The water pump, if you install it, has 6 months warranty or 9 months warranty or a year warranty, whatever your warranty may be. However, if we install it in the shop, it typically, in a lot of places, a lot of manufacturers, doubles the customer's warranty. But I hardly ever hear our people share that with our customers, right? Yes, I have it. Here it is. Here's the price. Would you like it? Yes or no? Boom, they're gone. So think about some of that. Are we trained to have our counter people explain the warranty to the customer? And are we looking for auxiliary items that need to be sold along with that order? Okay. Now, we're still working on the revenue side of this, and we want to build out our shop sales. How can we increase our sales to the shop? Well, do we have a designated salesperson assigned to the shop? Have you ever calculated how much in additional sales you need to justify adding a person? I've got a really simple program that once I know your net operating profit percentage, your gross margin, your number of technicians, all those little things, I can type it into my spreadsheet program and it'll tell you right now how many additional sales you need in your parts department to justify putting another person in the back counter. Because you can't just say to the manager, well, or the owner, that I'd like to add another person. A lot of times you're going to get challenged. They're going to say, well, is it worth it? Can you justify the expense? And we need to know how we justify it. How do we come up with those numbers? So if you need any help with that, you can always drop me a line. But how about our parts staff? Do they walk around service units to identify additional opportunities? And this can be huge, especially if you have an assigned back counter or a shop counter parts person. Look at the units and look at them. What kind of brand of filters do they have? What kind of batteries? Is there any accessories or upgrades, retrofit opportunities that we could put on this work order to let the customer know, hey, this baler, there's a new beefier components that we can sell you as an accessory or an upgrade. Our shop can put it on. It's X amount of dollars to have this done. All those kinds of things. But if we never spent any time walking the shop, we would never know. And that's, again, when you're looking at those units and you're looking at the filters and they don't have our OEM type filter, why not? Go back to the parts department, look up that customer and see when the last time they bought filters from you. Might be surprised, you know? So again, another one is do inspections. Pull a list of all the equipment that's about ready to fall off of warranty coverage. You know, you have 6 months or less or a year less of warranty. Call them, solicit them for an inspection so we can look at it, make sure there's anything on their piece of equipment that, hey, you know what, it's marginal or it's broken or whatever. Maybe under warranty we can get that covered. That's just a good way of doing business. It makes your customers feel like a trusted advisor. You really looking out for them. And then supply consumables to the shop. We ought to use what we sell, right? And I've done a lot of training and walking and visiting shops and seeing different types of brake clean or lubricant in the shop than what we display on our parts counter, right? And a lot of times I hear, well, the shop doesn't want to spend the money for this consumable. I think we need to look at that. There's a time and a place to make concessions, price concessions to sell that to the shop, because it doesn't look good when we're selling it over the front counter, but our professional technicians aren't using it in the back. So I'm a strong supporter of selling our own OEM consumables to our shop. How about purchasing a handheld battery tester and perform a test on all the units coming into the shop, right? Especially if that unit's been sitting there a while. A lot of times the technician will go to start it and it needs jump started. There's a lot of batteries that could be replaced if we tested every one that was coming into our shop. So those are just a few ideas that can help you increase your service department sales. Now that we have a forecast, we use some of those things. We built out our revenue side of it. Now we really need to work on the budget. So how do we budget the gross margin targets, and how can we increase our gross margin? Because remember, dollars are used to pay bills and the percentages are used for analysis. So a couple of ways that I threw up here that you can look at for improving your gross margin: buy better, negotiate better pricing or terms with our suppliers. Stock order. Do you monitor and know what your stock order utilization is? Right? There's some stores that don't have any idea what their stock order utilization or stock order percentages are. I look for 85% or greater. I think that if you did that, if you improved your stock order percentage, you'd obviously increase your gross margin. How about combining parts purchases with other locations or branches to maximize a discount? You know, you may need to have $50,000 on this order or $150,000 on that order to maximize the supplier discount. Put those orders together. Let's make sure we maximize our discount. And then markup versus margin. I've trained this for a lot of years now, and it surprises me how many people, they take their margin, they take their margin goal 30 and they mark it up by 30%, assuming they're going to have that markup's going to allow that margin. It doesn't. And we'll calculate it. We'll walk through it here in just a minute. But pricing matrix. Do you have a price matrix? If so, how did you build it? Did you put your price matrix on captive parts and non-captive parts? Do you do them both? I definitely believe that on your captive parts, you should have a pricing matrix. Your non-captive parts, the non-captive part being any part that they could buy at any part supply warehouse, that one might be marginal. You might not hit it as strong as you would your captive, but your captive ones are the ones they have to come see you for, right? Some dealerships base it off of MSRP. They say, what's my retail pricing? And they'll do a price matrix off of that. Others base it off of cost. So you can do it either way. I've seen it by category. They put all their harvest parts in one category and say, here's my price matrix on those. Here's my seeding, spraying, tillage, whatever. But you need to make sure that you have a pricing matrix, right? So that you can improve your gross margin. And then reduce discounting, okay? Now, price matrix, after you built the price matrix, I think it's a really, really good idea about 6 months, 8 months after you implemented your pricing matrix to go back and make sure it's doing what you thought it was going to do. Because I've seen a lot of price matrices built and there's one little thing or two little errors that they're not hitting exactly the way you anticipated. So what I'd recommend is after you build that price matrix and it's been running for 6 or 8 months, go back and pull all your gross margin percentages by transaction, dump that file into an Excel and sort it and find your center line. It's if your margin target is 30%, sort off all those greater than 30%. Anything less than 30%, I'd start looking through the quantities and the part numbers and seeing why. If you're thinking that that's a harvester part and you put a pricing matrix on it, why did it not hit? You may have a whole group of them in that harvest part category that aren't hitting because of one little thing that you didn't quite get set up in the price matrix setup. Okay, so if it looks suspicious, dig into it and get it fixed. But don't just set your price matrix and assume it's going to work 100% of the time, every single time. You may have made some errors. I have in the past, and so I'm giving you that tidbit from experience. Okay. Now, we talked about markup versus margin, and I've got to tell you, there's a real simple calculation for this, but I've seen it over and over. Our target is 30% margin. That's what we tell all of our people we want on our parts counter. We want a 30% margin. So they may buy an outside part, it comes in, they take the invoice, they take their calculator and they take it times 30% and they sell that part. And then we're only hitting a 20-something% margin, okay? So here's how we do it. Part cost us $50. We assume we take it times a 30% markup, gives us $15 gross margin. So we look at our sales price, we take our $50 cost of good, we add in our $15 worth of gross margin, our sales price becomes $65. Or we could just take that $50 cost times 130%, gives us the same $65, just two different ways of calculating. The problem is that's our markup. That's not our margin. If we take that $15 worth of gross margin that we made and divide it by our sales price of $65, you see that our margin's only 23%. And some people get stumbled up on this because they assume when they marked it up 30%, they were going to get a 30% margin. And we don't. We ended up with 23%. So the easiest way I found to do this is you take your parts cost, $50, and you start with 100%. And whatever you want for your gross margin factor, say we want 30% margin, that's where we want. We take 100% minus our markup that we want, the 30%, and we're left with a 70% reciprocal. We take that 70%, divide it to our parts cost of 50, that gives us a sales price of $71.43. Okay. So now if you looked at our gross margin is $21.43, we divide that by our sales price. Now we truly have a 30% margin. Okay. And I've trained this a lot, and I know that that's a aha moment for a lot of people because they've been trained and taught that a 30% markup was going to net them a 30% margin, and it doesn't. So now we're talking about reducing some discounts. Now, remember, I said reduce discounts. I don't want anybody to say, well, Wayne said I'm supposed to not discount, because there's a time and a place for discounting. But if you do discount, and say we have a 30% gross margin on our parts, how many more do you have to sell to maintain that same amount of gross margin dollar if you didn't discount it? And in this example, I'm saying, if you look across the top, that's our 30% margin right in the center. And if we discount it by 10%, we have to sell 50% more. So if we're currently selling 100, now we're going to have to sell 150 to make the same gross margin dollars. Okay. And people challenge me all the time on this and say, there is no way. You tell me I have to sell 50% more just because I offered a 10% discount? And I say, yes. And here's how we're going to show this and teach it. So our parts cost is $35. We divide it by the reciprocal of 70. We get a $50 sales price. Our gross margin is $15. Okay. Now, say we want to discount that by 10%. Historically, we sell 200 of those a year. So if we take our 200 times our $15 that we made historically, that was $3,000 worth of gross margin dollars. Now we just want to discount it by 10%. So, and then we're going to take that $50. We're going to take it times a 10% discount. We're going to offer the customer $5 off. So now we take that $2 times our $5 that we lost equals $1,000 in lost gross margin dollars. Okay. So how many more do we need to sell at that $10 margin to make the original 30,000? It's pretty simple. We take our 30,000 divided by our $10, comes up with 300 units rather than the 200. Or, like I said, 50% more, because you take 200 times our 50% is 100, 200 plus 100, 300. So you're selling 50% more just to make what you used to make before you gave that 10% discount. So you really need to be thinking about, do I need to offer discount? If you don't, then I would try to shy away from it. But there are good discounts, right? Remember, I did not say don't do any discounting, because not all discounting is bad. And I'll give you some examples of some good discounts. If we can increase the total units sold, right? Say we used to sell 200, but now we're going to be able to sell 5 or 6 or 700. That's a perfect time to give a little discount, right? Because we're going to increase our total sales. And if it pulls sales forward, somebody's on the fence, they don't know if they were going to buy it. You offer them a little discount and they say, yes, I'll take it. Great. Perhaps it gets you into a market that you've never been in. Perhaps it's net wrap or filters or consumables. You know, if you've never been in the net wrap business and now all of a sudden your marketplace says, hey, if you offer 10, 15% discount, you'll start selling net wrap. I think that's a great deal because you weren't selling it to begin with. So I always tell people, what's 100% of zero? Zero. You got 100%, but you were selling anything. So give some discount if it's going to drum up additional sales. But remember the impact it does have on your gross margin. Okay. Now, we've talked about the sales side. We've built up our revenue. We've talked about different ways of increasing our revenue in both the shop, over the counter. Now we've talked about how we can increase our gross margin through price matrixing, reducing some discounts. Now we need to control expenses to help our net income. So I always tell people all the time, don't focus on things that are outside your control. You know, I was a real stickler for expenses that they'd get me hung up, and I'd sweat over some of the expenses that I had zero control over. Okay. So if you're looking at your expenses, and some financial statements are very granular, they provide a lot of detail. Other financial statements that I've seen, they'll have 2 or 3 or 4 lines on there, and that's it. As far as a parts manager, that's all you see. So if it's that, if you're hardly getting anything, you might ask for more detail so you can help control it. If you're getting a lot of detail, forget the lines that you have no control over. You're not going to have much control over if, for example, you get a percentage of the overall budget for marketing and advertising, right? That could be a set expense. You're just going to get it. Set percentage, you're just going to get taxed at your rent, employee benefits, things like that. You're not going to have much control over. But the things you do have control over, you know, is parts adjustments, utilities, you know, things that you can actually focus and control. Look at those. Okay. One thing I talk about all the time to people is perpetual inventory counting. And they say, well, how's that an expense control? Well, if you're a dealership and you do an inventory once a year, and I've seen and heard, well, we're $20,000 short on inventory this year. Oh, holy smokes. Where's that all going to come from? If the accounting office wants to square that up, where are they going to take that $20,000 from? They're going to take it from your net operating income. That's the only place they can take it from. So that's a big hit. And I see it and hear about it all the time that we're taking these big hits at the end of the year. Why? When are we losing this inventory? And are we doing perpetual inventory counting to make sure that we're staying on top of these things and notice and maybe correct an error? Maybe it's an accounting error, a procedural error, a receipting error. We need to get that adjusted and counted for right away. But if we're not counting but one time a year, it's really hard to remember or figure out why you're short. Okay. How about subscriptions? These things hit our expense lines. And maybe several years ago, you were just getting into a market. Maybe you just took on a new product line and you signed up for some newsletter or subscription or something to learn more about that market or whatever. And now it's not as important to you, but we're still paying for it. And it could be $25, $30 a month, who knows? But it's just an additional expense that nobody's paying attention to. We need to review these expenses line by line and see if there's anything we can delete. Cell phones, data plans. This is a big one. We went through this and reviewed all of our cell phones. And it's crazy when you have several locations, how many cell phones get in our employees' hands. Say we had to see an outside salesperson, they had a cell phone. Then we move them to a different position. Maybe they become a counter person. We don't find the right person to backfill that spot. And this phone just gets slid in the service manager's desk. It's shut off. Nobody's using it. Well, 6 months, 8 months, a year later, we're still paying for the cell service, but nobody's even utilizing the phone. Go through that. I know for a fact a dealership that did that, we did that as well. And it saved us over $6,000 in 1 year. Okay. So look at those kinds of things. You might find something in there that make a huge difference. Freight charges is another big one. Do you know what your freight recovery is? And do you have a target? You know, are you saying, hey, I'd like to cover 70% of all our freight, or 85 or 90, 95, 100%, whatever it is. Sometimes 100% may or may not be realistic because there's other things that you send back. For example, you do your returns, that's freight that's non-recoverable. You might have sales department needs something sent off. You may or may not be able to recover that. So, but set a budget. You need to know where you're at, set a budget, and track your performance, okay? Company vehicle usage, that used to, it could be an issue, but when it was $2 a gallon, it wasn't a real big issue. Now that it's $5 a gallon, it's a bigger issue because that fuel, you know, it's costing you $100 or $120 to fill up a pickup truck anymore. That's a big expense. And is it really something that is necessary? Could it be controlled, right? How about parts ordered in error and not getting returned? That is like the easy button. I see it happen over and over at stores. They have a part that comes in, it's ordered in error, tech doesn't need it, front counter person doesn't need it anymore. And instead of putting it in a return bin so we can send it back, it just gets put in our mainline inventory. And when that happens, that's just hitting the easy button. And that's affecting our income, because what's going to happen to that part if we don't sell it? We have to spend time counting it. We have to spend time now packaging it up and returning it. And we don't get 100% of it, right? And we have freight going back as well. So if it's ordered in error, a lot of times you can make a claim on it and turn it right back, okay? But you have to do it within so many days. So think about that. That's another way to controlling some expenses, okay? Now, let's talk about expenses. And, you know, we need to train our counter people on how big of an expense really is. And so I use this in a lot of our trainings. Say your net income is 16% at your store. Your parts department, your net income is 16%, and we spend $1.50 on postage. How much do we have to sell in additional parts to cover that $1.50? Okay, if you know it, jot it down. Or you think you know it, jot it down. How about a $20 broom that gets damaged? Driving around the forklift, you hit it, you pinch it up against the wall, you drive over, whatever, break the handle, break the broom, whatever. It's only $20. Not that big a deal. Right? We sell thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars worth of parts. A broom's not that big a deal. Well, how much in additional sales does it take at a 16% net income to cover that broom? How about a $500 damage to the vehicle? Say you parts guy jumps in, backs up, hits one of the protective bollards and busts the tail light. Well, I know, for example, if you're driving a newer Ford truck, a tail light alone could cost that, right? So it's not a whole lot of damage to the vehicle. It could just be a tail light. But what is it? How much does it cost in additional part sales that we're now making zero on because it all went to this expense? There's your numbers. To cover that $1.50 worth of postage, it takes $9.37 worth of additional sales at a 16% net income in your parts room. That broom that we damaged cost $125. That one little accident to the tail light or the front rear bumper or whatever, $3,125 just to cover that, okay? So these things add up. I mean, it takes $125 worth of sales. Your next sale at $125 went zero to your net profit. Okay, so now we've talked about our net income and controlling some expenses. What are we going to do with all that? How do we promote it? Well, some of the best things that I found are parts boards. Managers can update those daily, and we make those parts boards, and I can tell you that they work really well as long as people buy in and utilize them, right? We've had them in the past where people put them up, they weren't really totally committed to utilizing them, and it would just became like another daily task, and they weren't really excited about it, and nobody got any value out of it. Others take it and say, hey, this is a great way to communicate our performance, our team's performance to my people, and they get a lot of traction out of it. The employees really love seeing that data up there, tracking their performance, because everybody wants to have a roadmap to know where we're going, where we've been, where we headed, right? So you can track sales on these boards, track sales by counter person. You can take your total sales versus your budget or your forecast, take your total net dollars versus your budget. You can track lines of inventory that you've counted versus where you need to be. You can track fill rates, off the shelf fill rate. You can track your lost sales for the month. All those kinds of things can be put up on this board that are customized for your store. and they work really, really well. But again, it's something you have to do. Bi-monthly update meetings are really good. You can discuss where you're at mid-month versus the budget. At the end of the month, you can discuss, hey, here's where we were versus our budget and what are the goals for next month, right? You went through all the work of building that budget and the forecast. You need to share it with your people so that they understand it can help you hit your target. Okay. Some other parts metrics that I think are really important to watch are parts inventory turn. And I don't care what your turn goal is. It could be 2.5, 3, 3.2, 3.5, 4. I don't really care. What you really need to know is where you at, what's your target, and how do you improve it. Okay. I always shot for above 3. I think 3 times turn is good. I think it's fiscally responsible. I think in today's supply chain issues, it might be a little tougher, and it may not be as prudent to have that high of a return, especially if you can't backfill those parts. But nonetheless, we need to know what our goal is and stick to it. Ensure we're hitting our target. Okay. And there's just some ideas on how to help you with that. You can work with your suppliers, share with them what your stocking levels and your turn goals are, so they understand, hey, when Wayne or anybody calls for this return, I understand why, because they want to maintain a 2.5 times turn or 3.2 times turn. So they get it. We need to establish good stocking procedures that increase our turns, making sure that if we do order something in error, or it doesn't get sold to a special order customer, that it doesn't just get into our mainline inventories. We put it in a return bin and it gets sent back right away. Okay. We need to set idle capital targets by age. In my opinion, you should look and say, what's my 24-month and greater? What's our goal? Your goal could be 0, right? I don't want anything on my shelf that's been there for 2 years or longer. Okay. 18 to 24 months, you may say I'd 3% or less, I'm fine with. 12 to 18 months, 5 to 8%, 10%, whatever your goal is, you need to document it and you need to share it with your team, and you need to work to and make sure you stay within those guidelines. And then the last thing, I visit a lot of stores, and most stores don't have an established scrapping, write down return policy, right? Some may have a return policy. They're saying, hey, I want to do a monthly return, or I want to do a quarterly return. But when you talk to them, okay, what about your scrapping process? What's that look like? What kind of budget do you have set aside? What's the owner, the board, the directors, the location manager, whoever authorizes that? What is your authorization point? Do you know that every quarter you can return $2,000 or $5,000 worth of parts or scrap that much? A lot of dealerships don't have that. I think it's something that your parts manager, you should have and you should know. Because I go into stores that have parts on the shelf that have been there for 25 years and haven't sold, totally obsolete, but it's still on our balance sheet. Our chances of selling it are slim to none. So why are we still carrying it? Okay. Improving absorption. Absorption is becoming a bigger and bigger term in our industry. Some dealerships monitor absorption and track absorption really hard. Others kind of look at it and say, yeah, it is what it is. But absorption really, in the most basic terms that I can give you, it takes parts department gross margin dollars and the service department gross margin dollars, puts those dollars together and takes that and says, how well do those dollars cover the total dealership expenses? That at the most basic level is what I can tell you absorption is. Now, it can get refined and defined differently by manufacturers. Some say it's all dealership expenses minus sales commissions or sales wages, plus interest, minus depreciation. You can slice and dice it a lot of different ways, but the gist of it is what we're really looking at. Can the parts and service department's gross margin dollars sustain our dealership? Can it cover our dealership expenses? And I tell everybody that makes you bulletproof. The better you do in parts and service of covering absorption, the better your dealerships are to weather tough times. Okay. So what we can do to improve that is we need to really drive sales without any additional expenses. We need to proactively look at ways to reduce our total dealership expenses. Some of the best ideas I've seen are sharing resources such as vehicles. You know, the parts department may have its own parts delivery truck that gets used a little bit. Service department has a hot shot delivery and pickup truck that they need to run around and pick up parts or that they dropped off at the machine shop or whatever, right? Well, instead of each one of them having a brand new pickup, what about they have one pickup and share it, right? Sharing a resource. Sometimes in the parts room, they're like, boy, in the mornings around here, it's crazy. We're trying to check in the freight, get our freight put away on the shelf because we want to have it all checked in immediately as soon as possible. We don't ever want to go one day with having freight laying on our back dock, right? We want to get everything checked in, receipted, and put away that day. And so they're saying, boy, I could really use somebody in the mornings to help us with that, but I really can't afford to have a full-time person. I just don't have enough volume for them to do. Service department could be in the same exact boat and saying, look, in the afternoons, it's crazy around here. I really wish I had somebody to help me process work orders, help deliver equipment out, help take payments, help answer the phones in the afternoon, something like that. So what about just hiring one person, have them work in the parts department in the morning, and in the afternoon go work in service, and split their cost 50-50 between the two departments, right? Anything you can do to help increase margin in both parts and service. That's the only way to really help absorption. Look for ways to decrease total dealership expenses. And the other way is to, and in conjunction with, is to improve our gross margins. Okay. Now, here's some KPIs that I told you I would share with you. Again, these are guidelines. You might jot them down. You might say, yes, our expenses as a percentage of revenue is 22%. Well, in my mind, you're out of line for your parts room. Okay. Your net income truly should fall between the 10 and 16%. Some of you may be at 19%. Great. That's awesome. Okay. Stock order percentage, I really pushing north of 85%. That's where we need to be. Okay. Now we're pushing up against our time limit. Let's talk about some daily tasks. I know this is going by really quick and I apologize, but some daily tasks for a parts manager or anybody in our side, our department that the parts manager assigns these to. We need to review and submit stock orders daily. All parts need to be checked in and put away daily. Notify customers of special order parts when they're received. I can't tell you how many times I've seen it, I've heard it, I've experienced it. Customer will say, hey, I was just driving by, wanted to check on that part I ordered. The parts person goes back, checks, comes back up and says, yeah, it's been here for a day or two. Could have been here a week, but we're not real good at being proactive and calling on those special orders. Okay. Every day we need to be answering our emails and voicemails. Okay. I always prepare daily parts paperwork to my parts people. They gave them on hand, no bin, negative on hand by that counter person, gave them a bin check. And it's more than just counting parts. It's cleaning, sealing, and putting those parts back away, right? Making sure it has a bin label. And any stock status part that went to zero on hand that day was documented. I have those parts people verify that, yes, it is in fact a zero. That just helped us with our accuracy, helped us with our fill rate. And then update our parts board and then review our parts call log books. And some of you may be saying, well, what's a parts call log book? Parts call log books, I'll show you an example of them here in just a minute. They were a game changer. They make a huge difference in a parts department. Another daily task, pull inventory reports. Look for positive and negative inventory adjustments, especially if you allow your parts counter people to make those type of adjustments. Some only let the parts manager do it, and that's the way I view it. I think only the parts manager should be doing positive and negative inventory adjustments. You can pull invoices with discounts. You can pull invoices with returned parts. So you can make sure that, hey, that part we returned, it's a non-stock part. Where is it? Is it actually in our return bin where it belongs? Good deal. Perfect. And then ensure all your paperwork is turned in from front counter people. Okay. This is an example of a parts call log book. It took out of just a copy of one of the companies that utilizes these, blocked off the logo. That's where your company logo can go. All these lines are customizable. You can format them any way you want. These tend to hit the majority of the information, but each one of your counter people has these books. And as they take a phone call or they have an interaction with a customer, they just jot all this down, the phone number, the name, what they're working on, the items needed, the price, in stock, yes or no, and ordered. If it says in stock, no, and is it ordered, is there an N or a Y there? The next day, what I'd encourage all of our parts managers is go through those books, look at them, and if it's in stock, no, and it was ordered, no, then I would ask you as a parts manager, look in your system under lost sales. Did we record a lost sale? If we didn't, we need to find out from our counter people. We didn't order it. They didn't take it. We didn't sell it. What's the deal? Why didn't we record a lost sale? Because we need those lost sales. We need to track those demands to help improve our fill rate. So that's one of the advantages of these books. Another big advantage of these books was the simple fact that, say that's my customer, I'm dealing with them, and tomorrow I'm sick, and you're covering for me. Person calls in and says, hey, I talked to Wayne. He's there. I'd like to talk to him. No, he's sick today. Is there something I can help you with? Well, I talked to him yesterday or 2 days ago or last week about my tractor. Instead of you having to go through and hassle the customer with all this information again, maybe we needed a serial number to even finish it, looking it up the first time, they're going to get really frustrated saying, well, I just gave him all that information. Well, I'm sorry, I don't have it. I don't know what to do. If you want me to help you, I need all this information again. Well, if you dig through my book, you can find it. You can tell them exactly what we had in stock, what the prices were. If I had to order something, it's all right there. And that's a huge game changer for our parts people. Okay, we need to keep moving. Weekly task. Review lost sales report to ensure that our counter people are recording lost sales. We need to make sure we have a good process so we don't over record lost sales. We don't want to drive our demands higher than they truly are. Review back order parts and update. And you've heard management by walking around. This is a really good deal. Walk your department. Look for dirty shelves, open shelf display areas, non-priced display items, right? Make sure everything's priced out on your shelves. Old marketing material. Sometimes we have old ads hanging up. We need to clean all that up, and just an overall cleanliness of your department. Okay. Monthly tasks. Definitely every month I'd be talking at the end of the month with the team about our performance, our forecast, our goals, any new programs coming from our manufacturer. I'd be pulling aged inventory reports and preparing a return, review all my financials. I'd clean up all my special order shelves and prepare those for return, clean up my warranty shelves. And then I'd be checking for training opportunities for our counter people as well. And then change your showroom displays. You can do that monthly. It doesn't have to be the total store gets changed, but maybe you pick one display case or one display item and change it up. Okay. So now that we have our budget and our forecast and all, and we have our daily task and all those kinds of set, there's an article I read by Scott Frothingham that was talking about habits. Because I was always told, well, 30 to 45 days can build a habit. Well, psychologists say, it can take anywhere between 18 and 254 days for a person to form a new habit. And on average, 66 days for the new behavior to become automatic. So if there's anything that you think in this daily task you want to do, track it for almost a year, because it's going to take at least 66 days on average before that behavior becomes automatic. Okay. Now, that's been a lot of information to digest in a short amount of time. And here's my email address. Here's my website. We'll have time. We've got about 7 minutes for some Q&A. But as you can see, parts managers, you have a lot to do on a daily basis, weekly, even monthly, to keep that department running smoothly. And I know it's not easy. I hope there was some tidbits of information in today's 1 hour little webinar that might help you. And if there's any questions, if you have anything that you'd like to ask, I'm available for the next 5 minutes or so, and love to talk to you. So thank you very much for attending. I really do appreciate it.
I appreciate you as well, Wayne. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was very informative, well packed with information. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay. Q&A. We are now in the Q&A portion. So we actually did, as I was saying that, have some questions come in. So here's one that says, what is your take on prepaying for part orders, given our industry of relational selling versus transactional selling? Will it hurt a relationship with the customer when we ask them to pay upfront?
That's a wonderful question. And what I found is in the automotive sector, it was really common to prepay special order parts. The ag sector, it's not as common. In the construction, it's more like automotive. It's very common to ask for a prepaid special order part, because just like they're saying, it's not a transactional one and done type customer. These are relationship customers. We've been dealing with some of these customers in at least the ag sector of our business for years, decades. And so when those type of customers come in, I would probably say, let's just order it for them and get it in. Now, if it's a new customer, new to the area, I have no problem with prepaying special order parts. If you're on the construction side and there's a lot of transient deals, people coming through, working on a project in your town or your city or something, they're used to it. They'll have no problem, and they'll understand why they need to prepay. And if they really need that part, Ben, they'll pay for it because they want it, right? So that's how I would answer that.
Okay, wonderful. We had some more come in. Marvin asks about, there will be a recording available later today. Yes, there will. Today or early tomorrow morning. Jeff was hoping he could see the weekly slide info again. Wayne, if you're able to slide back to that.
There you go, Jeff.
Okay, that's for Jeff. Now, here's a question from Mitch. He asks, do we get too focused on gross margin? We pay bills with cash. If we add $100,000 in sales of, say, filters or net wrap type items, if we lowered our margin, even at 10% margin, that is an additional $10,000 of revenue. We might show a 29.5% margin instead of 30%, but yet we made 10% more. So are we focused too much on gross margin?
I would say that it's a balancing act, Mitch. If that reduction in discount ramped up our sales volume, I'm all with you. I totally get it. Because again, remember, gross margin dollars are paying our bills, and the percentages we just use for analyzing. We're at 29.5, our target's 30. What are some different categories? Maybe some of those captive parts, we could adjust that on our price metric and get us back to our 30% overall goal. But I totally agree. Just like I said, when I was talking about we need to review our discounts, we need to slow our discounts down, not just give a discount just because somebody asked. But if we're increasing our total sales by offering a discount, especially net wrap, filters, oil, those kinds of things, you bet I'm with you 100%, Mitch. I'd rather, again, remember, 100% of zero is still zero.
Awesome. Okay. We had two people ask to see the KPI slide again. Wayne, if you can shuffle to that, I'll get our next question ready.
There you go. And again, remember, these are just guides, right? They're pretty much blending all the industries together. This is where I feel you really need to be. Like our gross margin, I could argue for a large ag, small ag kind of construction, even 30, 34, 35% would be a better guide, but we definitely need to be greater than 30%.
Awesome. All right. We had another question come in that was wondering your thoughts on getting a parts call logbook started.
Yeah. So any of those, the parts call logbook, the parts board that I talked about, if you want to drop me a message at that wbglobalservices.com, I will be more than happy to get you hooked up with the company that can manufacture those. They're big dry erase boards. They're customized with your company. Whatever targets you want on it can be pre-populated. And all your parts manager has to do is update the data, hit it with a glass cleaner, wipe it off, and keep going. And same way with the parts books. I have those printed. They come in a nice, thick, bound binder, like a wire-bound binder. And really nice heavy duty books, have your logo on the front. Good game-changing books.
Great. And we had another one come in that says, I have tried to get the shop convinced to buy our cleaners and chemical, but they say we are too expensive. Any ideas?
Yes. And remember, I started in parts, went to service, and sometimes we're pitted against each other because we're both trying to chase our net profit targets. So I, as a fixed operations director, look at it and say, look, we really, our shop needs to sell and utilize our chemicals. So in the parts room, I would say, look, order all of them on Best Buys or stocking opportunities, stock up on them whenever you can get the lowest acquisition price and sell them all to your shop at either cost plus 5, cost plus 10, cost plus 15, whatever you can agree on. Don't try to sell them at full boat retail because you're not going to do it. And you're really just going to cause a fight between you and your service manager because he's looking at that can of brake clean. And just because it's our OEM, it could be $3 or $4 a can versus 99 cents a can that they can buy on special or that they can buy on special. But definitely I'd buy them at the best opportunity and the lowest acquisition cost I could get them. And I'd sell them to my shop at a low margin because, again, like Mitch had said, 100% of zero sales is still zero. You're at 100%, but you're getting nothing. So I would reduce the margins and sell them all to my shop. I'd make sure my shop is full of our chemicals.
All right. Now, the last question we have before we wrap up here comes from Marvin, who asks why he would want to pick a paper parts call book log over simply recording recording it directly into his business system. Do you have any thoughts on pros or cons there?
Either's fine with me. Just my suggestion is you need to do it. If you have the ability and your people are trained to just log it into the computer, into the CRM, 100% support that. If they're used to writing it down on a pad of paper, sticky notes, different little parts counter pads, you know, I've seen those ones that the pages rip off, they fold them over and there's 30 of them bent over and then that thing gets thrown away. That's not good. I've seen sticky notes. I hate sticky notes. This is just one way, Marvin, that I've seen that works really well. And it's really easy. But if your people are trained and it's in your CRM tool, by all means, utilize it.
All right. And with that, unfortunately, we do have to cut it. I see Randy and Nazario. I know you have comments. Wayne, I believe you offered your email address up for anyone with follow-up questions.
Sure do.
It's right here if you guys want to reach out to him. But to wrap up, thank you all for joining us today. On behalf of Wayne and the Western Equipment Dealers Association and Farm Equipment, we thank you for joining us today. Feel free to reach out and let us know what other topics you want us to cover on live events in the future. And let us know your thoughts on today's live event. Once again, there will be a recording available fairly shortly, so you can come back and rewatch this at any time and get all the slides again. So thank you, Wayne, for presenting for us today. Lots of useful information. And have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time and thank you for attending.